The UCF Knights get a much-needed win in the Big 12 tournament, and boy, was it beautiful.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Come on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. From the last word on sports is my good friend, Andrew Gluco. Andrew, we were watching last night. We were all witnesses last night to the onslaught that the Knights put on the Utes. Second time this season. I was going to be pretty disappointed if they lost that game. They won it. They won it big. Let's talk about it, man. Big win. Yesterday we said they got to get at least one. They've got to get one. They got it. And man, it didn't start pretty, but certainly it ended the way we know UCF basketball can be.
Well, first half, they started off strong, up 7-2, and then just they couldn't do anything. They were playing a lot of one-on-one basketball, just forcing things, and Utah started putting on a passing clinic. The Utah couldn't shoot to save their life. So what they do, they played inside, and all their points were coming from the paint, and they just found ways to get the ball inside, a lot of cuts, screens, pick and rolls. I mean, and it was absolutely beautiful to watch them work during that stretch in the first half where it looked like it was going to be a blowout the other way, with Utah just absolutely on fire.
Right.
A lot of assists, a lot of good moves, a lot of points in the paint, the high percentage shots. And it, UCF could not buy a bucket. But, you fast forward, midway through the first half, and then UCF starts chipping away. And they're just hanging around. You get towards the end of the first half, and they close it out with that really good three. Keyshawn Hall started to heat up at the end of the first half. He and Darius Johnson largely struggled first half, but the team stuck around. So the commentators, obviously, they were very pro Utah on this one.
Weren't they though?
They were. They were, because they were commenting how Utah was winning despite all their problems, but didn't change the fact of UCF couldn't hit a shot, and they for the longest time, and they're down halftime by a point, and closing it out. Their top two players struggled first half. I mean, Darius Johnson 5 points in the first half, Keyshawn Hall 6 points in the first half, out of 39. So you had other players step up. Jordan Ivory Curry is back and looked really solid.
Wait, Andrew. Let me end while we're there. Before we move on to them, I do want to talk about the first half that Darius Johnson and Keyshawn Hall had. Those guys were a combined 3 of 13 in the first half, and UCF hung in there. When you look at the score at the end of the first half, man, like I thought they did a really, really, really good job just kind of hanging in there with them down only one. The big three at the buzzer at the end of the first half, a momentum swinger for UCF. Look, we've said repeatedly, this team goes kind of as those guys go for the most part. But credit to their teammates for holding them in the first half when they were struggling shooting. They took 13 shots. They had 3 of them. But Mustafa Sham and Jordan Ivy Curry stepped up. Those guys were a combined 6 of 10 in the first half, and that really helped carry them.
Right, and I'd like to point out that Ivy Curry's, he's been out the last couple games. They even said he was kind of a game-time decision as far as playing this time, and he was a huge factor. I mean, he played the sixth man and rose to the occasion. Obviously, a little bit limited as far as what he could and couldn't do. You looked a little step, but I mean, the Jordan Ivy Curry is a really good player, and to see him kind of slide back into things looked really nice. 9 minutes in the first half, so played a little under half of the first half, and then 17 minutes in the second half. So I mean, he was the guy they went to. He basically took over for Debo Coleman, who just he's kind of there. He didn't do a whole lot, had some trouble handling the ball. I would not be surprised to see Ivory Curry slide back in the starting lineup today against Kansas. Here's the thing, and we've talked about this, is the need of the bench to step up, and they did in the first half.
Yeah.
You talk about Darius Johnson, Keyshawn Hall struggling. You have Benny Williams, not a big scorer. He's a defensive player. Had a number of good looks inside. Couldn't really convert much, but the one that he did convert was a really pretty looking inside shot. He put up a bucket. Ivory Curry, we've already talked about him. Tyler Hendricks, he doesn't get much playing time, but he was opportunistic when 2 for 2. One of them was a 3-pointer, got 5 points, helped kind of hold the line a little bit. Well, your star players are struggling, and I've talked about that. You've talked about that, where you can't be an all-star every game, but you need your other guys, especially your second unit, to step up during those times. I think UCF did a pretty good job of that in the first half. They didn't need him so much in the second half outside of Ivory Curry, who basically played the majority of the second half. But you need that second unit. For once, UCF put it together in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, 42% from three is good enough to get the job done here. 10 of 24 from three-point range. Utah, a pathetic 4 of 26. They shot 15% from three in this one. Absolutely awful. But look, the bench, you got 22 points from the bench in this one. So you outscored their bench by 5 points in this one. You got out on the break. Not a ton of points in the paint. UCF relying on the jump shot. Those shots weren't falling early, but certainly they were falling in the second half of this one. To close this segment, I want to talk about what UCF was able to do despite giving up 18 offensive rebounds. Like, look, there's something they have to solve if they're going to have a chance versus Kansas. I don't think they can lose. I mean, they lost the total rebounding battle by 5, but again, 18 offensive rebounds certainly can't happen if you want to stay in this one. I think giving up that many offensive rebounds and winning by 15 kind of underscores how special this team is when they're scoring.
Well, they started boxing out a little bit and preventing those inside, second chance shots. Utah scored 42 points in the paint. That was their offense. They just could not score outside. Their shooting was just absolutely atrocious. But part of going into halftime is making adjustments, and that's what UCF did here. It was probably some of the most radical, not so much as like crazy, but radical as far as difference between the first half and second half that I've seen out of a UCF squad in a while. They completely changed how they operated, and Utah could not figure it out.
Yeah, they definitely could not figure it out. Look, this is what they needed. I think this is a good reminder to everybody. It's what we've been saying. UCF at the one can run with just about anybody when they're on. And we saw a little bit of that versus Utah, I think. Again, this is a Kansas team, and we'll talk about this later, that they gave a run for their money on their home court. But, man, I think this is a big win for Johnny Dawkins and his squad. You get out of the first round of the Big 12 tournament. Before we move on, I got to mention, I hate the court. What's with the court, man?
I don't know. Yeah, they did it for the women's tournament. I wasn't digging it with the 12s, everywhere. I'm watching the game with my wife, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm not digging it." She did not like it, right off the bat. So, it was not pleasant to the eyes at all. But something I want to point out before we move on towards previewing the rest of the tournament. We talked about UCF going 10 of 24 from 3-point land, but that's only part of the story. The real story is how they broke it apart between the first half and the second half. And that's kind of what I was saying, a radical change. UCF stopped doing so much isolation play and started just moving the ball around, finding their spots. So Darius Johnson and Keyshawn Hall went 2 for 7 in the first half from 3-point land. You know how many shots they took from 3-point land in the second half? 1. And it was one that Darius Johnson hit. They changed it up. They started moving the ball around to find opportunities. They didn't force it. And that's what Utah was doing in the first half, is they were passing the ball looking for that opportunity. UCF took a step back and they started moving the ball around a lot more, and things started happening. They started getting higher percentage shots. They weren't getting into situations where being double and potentially triple teamed. They were finding the open man because they were keen on Keyshawn Hall in the first half because they know he can score and he can score a lot. Well, when they started passing the ball a lot more, they had to respect the open man. They backed off on Hall, and Hall was able to go to work in the second half. I think the fact that this was so successful in the second half, that this is something that UCF is going to have to really consider doing more of in the future. You don't have to be a hero. Move the ball around, trust your teammates, and I expect Johnny Dawkins, when reviewing the tape, because there's not a lot of time between then and now. They played tonight, but this is a smart coaching staff, and these are smart players. They're going to recognize what worked, and they're going to have to incorporate it into their offense against this Kansas team. We'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Yeah, well, what is the formula for success for UCF moving forward? Again, more of that right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by friends at Nissan and all new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to unexpected guests, these guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut team of the week are the Duke Blue Devils. John Shire's team, led by the National Player of the Year, Cooper Flagg, just ripped through the ACC going 19-1. The Blue Devils were plus 434 points in the ACC games and the largest point differential by a power conference team in league play since Kentucky in 1953-54 season. It's clear that our team of the week is out here and ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in an all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, the Rogue Pathfinder, and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com is where you'll find your next Nissan. Boo, Duke Blue Devils. Boo.
There are still traumatized UCF fans out there. I am one of them.
I'm so sorry, guys. I had to read that. Look, you hit on it a little bit before we ended the last segment, but the formula for success for UCF moving forward. Number one, I think that they can't afford, the way this team shoots threes, they can't afford to go cold from the 3-point line. To advance in this tournament, they're going to have to go on one of the greatest shooting streaks we've seen from them this season. And hitting at a 42% clip, I think, is good enough to get the job done. They were cold. They were ice cold from three to start this game. And then, bam, they found their rhythm close to the end of the first half. They did not let Utah run away with this game. And I thought that was important, that they stayed in there. They hung. They played good defense. They hung tough. Nils Mahovsky came up with some big steals in this one. Just momentum killer plays, Andrew, that kept UCF in the game until they could get going. 73% from the free throw line. I look, there's a small margin of error for this team, but I think that if you can keep the rebounding battle close, I don't love 18-8 on the offensive boards, right? And you can shoot 42% from three, 55% from the field for the game. You got a shot in every single game you play moving forward.
Well, I mean, they got hot when it mattered. They got hot to start the second half and use that to propel themselves into the lead. And then they settled back. They didn't go to prevent defense, but they just started being a little bit smart, move the ball around more, take their time, pass it. They didn't panic. They didn't feel like they had to force it in there. And I think, you play loose like that. You play smart. And I think if they do that, they could give some fits to Kansas. UCF when they switch from zone to man has often give teams fits when they switch back and forth, and they may need to do that. Hunter Dickinson is just such a matchup nightmare for this team. Each of the last 2 games he scored, and he scored a lot. First game when they beat UCF by over 50 points, I mean, he was just having his way with the team first half, and the Knights could not recover. In the second one, it wasn't until the second half that he was able to start getting some offense going. The big key is Mustafa Sham has to avoid foul trouble because they don't have depth in the big man category. So if he could stay out of foul trouble, and maybe either Hall or Darius Johnson, who are good at cutting to the hoop, especially Johnson. Darius Johnson is a great guy when it comes to just cutting from the outside, drawing fouls on big men. If he can get Hunter Dickinson into foul trouble, this could really change the dynamics of this game. I think you got to be smart with it, because remember, they shot almost over 70% in the second half, and that's because they got smart with their shots. They didn't force. They only took 21 shots versus 32 in the first half. They shot less because they were shooting smarter. They were taking their time. They didn't feel rushed. They only took 6 3-pointers versus 18 in the first half. And there were just some wild shots. And you're just like, oh, yeah, I don't like where this is going. I'm just going to throw a 3 up and see what happens. That's loser mentality. And that's why they weren't hitting their baskets. When they started to channel, the assassin in them, they started to be a little more surgical in their moves and started to hit better shots because they were getting better looks. You drive in, you kick it out. You got that open man because they're collapsing down on the ball. You've got a wide open shot. You have obviously a better chance of hitting that than you do when you're at the top of the key, potentially with 2 guys draping over you. So as long as they're smart, they can really hang with any team in this conference. They hung with Kansas. They've beaten Texas Tech. They stayed close against West Virginia, bringing it to within 3 points at the end of the season. They were to the wire against Houston. We know what this team is capable of. Obviously, they're not at 100% because there's still players that are still out. But the fact that Jordan Ivory Curry is back, you utilize him. He was a game changer. He scored 15 points in this one. He was third in scoring on the game and was consistent when your 2 star players were inconsistent in the first half. He was the guy you can rely on. He was the best shooter in the first half. So, don't be afraid, to rely on the second guy, the third guy, the fourth guy, but be smart about your shots. Don't have your center. Yeah. Okay. He can hit 30% of his 3-pointers, but don't force the issue. And that's what was happening in the first half, forcing the issue. He didn't take a 3 in the second half. Cham didn't. And you know what? He did okay. He actually scored another 6 points. If you want to bring Dickinson out, okay, pull him out, towards the 3-point arc. If Dickinson comes with him, great. If not, okay, change tactics. Go at him. You have the height, to hang with him. As long as Cham stays out of foul trouble. So I again, hero ball doesn't work, and they didn't fall into hero ball finally in the second half of this one. We saw it constantly during the season where in the second half, hero ball would take over and they would lose games that they should have won. This time didn't happen.
This second half was about efficiency. UCF only took 21 shots on goal in the second half. They hit 15 of them for a 71.4% clip. So to your point, shot selection was insane. I just want to point out, Darius Johnson in the second half was 6 of 6 from the field, and he missed. Keyshawn Hall was 4 or 5 from the field. So the pair that went 3 of 13 from the field in the first half were a combined 10 of 11 in the second half of that game. So look, I mean, they were the offense in the second half. we talked about it. When you look at the first half box, it was Ivy Curry and Chom that carried them. And so when I will repeat this until I'm blue in the face. At the one deep, this team can score with anybody. And you saw them share the load evenly between the first and the second half. Also underrated, again, you pointed it out. I just want to make sure I repeat it for our viewers. The return of Ivy Curry is huge. Huge. Johnny Dawkins talked about needing a third scorer. He said this. He said, when we have a third scorer, we're really difficult to beat. But he understands that when it falls primarily just on Keyshawn Hall or Darius Johnson, and one of those guys has a bad game, it's very difficult for them offensively. You allowed, I want to make sure I just quote this right. You allowed Utah to take 15 more shots on goal than you did, and you beat them by 15. Say that again. They took 15 more shots in this game than UCF and got beat by 15. That's an incredible stat to me. Only 53 shots in today's college basketball is an insanely low number, Andrew. So this was about efficiency and shot selection for Johnny Dawkins' squad here. I thought they chose their shots in the first half. It's particularly at the beginning. Some of the threes they were taking, I know those are shots that those guys hit from time to time, but they were really difficult, low percentage shots they were taking at the beginning of the game. And man, you saw them hit shots and flow. They seemed to be getting in the right place for a lot of those like 50-50 balls. The guy standing there, bam, he's got a wide open three, just off of giving effort and being where he needs to be. If you're UCF, you beat teams better than you and deeper than you by giving a greater effort than they do, by wanting it more, by selling out, by playing all out, right? And you got to believe that you can win. Look, I thought they should have beat Kansas. We're going to talk about that in our next segment, but this was a good start to the Big 12 tournament for this squad, and the formula for success moving forward is not going to involve a huge margin for error, but man, they have a chance to make this fun, I think, tonight.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to throw out there, to kind of hammer home how efficient they were, was the free throw line. Keyshawn Hall had 10 free throws in the second half. It was 9 of 10. And it was only 3 or 4 in the first half. The team was 4 of 6 in the first half, 15 of 20 in the second half. Efficient passing sets up the defense to make mistakes and will foul to prevent easy baskets. Or you can get a good look and they foul, just trying to make a play. You can force mistakes when you by good passing. And, we talked about this before. Utah put on a clinic early on in their passing. It was just absolutely gorgeous to watch. UCF took a page out of their playbook and started moving the ball, finding that inside cutter and making moves. They need to continue that. That's going to force mistakes. That's going to force the ability to get to the line. And UCF is a good free throw shooting team. They showed it again, last night. Get to the line, you will score points.
Yep, absolutely. Look, 8:30 Eastern tonight, they play the Kansas Jayhawks. We're going to preview that game right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by Roy. Attention, Locked On UCF fans. Ever wish you could directly support your favorite UCF athlete and be part of their journey? Now you can with Roy, the NIL app that puts fans in control. Before Roy, NIL deals were often handled behind closed doors, and fans like you didn't have a chance or a clear way to directly support the players you love. Now with Roy, you can make a real impact and feel closer to the athletes representing UCF. With Roy, you get to choose the player you want to support, decide how much you want to contribute, and get exclusive content straight from the athletes that you back. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back, so it's a risk-free way to show your support and make your voice heard. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing UCF athletes the way they deserve, with transparency, trust, and real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite athlete today. It's a tall task. They've got to beat Kansas. Kansas is a 6 seed in the Big 12 tournament. So if you're UCF, this is a mortal Kansas squad in my book. I think they can be beat. I think that UCF proved it when they went to Kansas and lost by 4, collapsing down the stretch. However, now you're on a neutral court. Albeit an ugly court, you're on a neutral court. And you have a chance to move forward in this tournament. And so Kansas didn't play yesterday. They didn't play yesterday, right? I don't think they played yesterday.
No.
So if you're Kansas, you may be. I talked about this a couple last week when we talked about it. If you're UCF, you're hot, right? And sometimes I think that means more than getting that bye, right? So you've been sitting if you're Kansas and you're waiting on this one, and UCF is coming in on a heater, right? They just beat Utah by 15 points in the first round and shot 71% from the field in the second half of their game. Look, win the rebounding battle. Do not turn the ball over. And I think that you have a chance if you're UCF in this one. Look, I like the Knights to shock the world, Andrew, in this one. I'm picking UCF 78, Kansas 72. The Knights go on to the next round. What say you, sir?
This is going to be a tough one.
Okay.
Granted, this is not the same Kansas team in years past. This team's not nearly as good. They're mortal. They're beatable. Both teams put up similar amount of points. UCF's 4th in the conference. Kansas is 6th. The big thing, and it all comes back to, is can UCF's defense find itself? Can they show up? UCF has the worst scoring defense in the conference. They give up 83 points a game, and they only score. They average 77. So they actually give up more points than they score on a regular basis. The thing about Kansas only gives up 68 points. They're 5th in the conference as far as scoring defense. They have the lowest field goal percentage allowed, while UCF has the 2nd worst field goal percentage on offense. They score by just chucking up shots. UCF is number 1 in the conference for field goal attempts in the game. Kansas is at 3rd. They're shortly behind. They put up more 2-pointers than anyone else, both attempts and makes. But UCF's going to have to really clamp it down. UCF's going to have to really focus on the offensive rebounds. UCF is number 1 in the conference in offensive rebounds.
Yep.
But Kansas is number 1 in defense and total rebounds. So UCF's going to have to box out, which is what they weren't doing in the first half. They have to get better position, and they have to pick their spots. And I'll use an example. Mustafa Cham has done this more than once, where he'll go for a block. Okay, but the way he goes into it, he puts himself out of position to get a rebound and allows the opponent for an offensive board. Sometimes you have to just, if you don't have you're not in the right spot, the right look to go for the block. Sometimes you may have to settle back and just box out for the board. And sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. But you have to pick your spots, because he largely would put himself out of position and allow for a new possession or a very easy second chance point shot for the opponent. UCF's got to be smart. This Kansas team, you can't allow them to do that. You also have to, like we talked about before, make the extra pass, force them to respect your other players. Jordan Ivory Curry being back, he's your 3rd leading scorer on the team. Respect your other players. Allow that to open up the door for Johnson and Hall to make moves and cut. Don't just try to play one-on-one ball. Do a pick and roll. Do the backdoor screen. Make moves that bring you towards the hoop, away from off the ball, and make a shot there. That will also help draw fouls. Get to the foul line. This is a team that Kansas is very good at not committing fouls. So they have the lowest average of fouls per game at under 14. UCF's kind of is at 17. But UCF is really good at drawing fouls. UCF draws over 18 fouls from other teams. So they need to draw fouls on Kansas, get them in a little bit of trouble, get Dickinson on the bench, and that can really do some damage.
I agree. Look, when you look at the first matchup that these two teams played, UCF got 75 shots on goal. Like in the first matchup, I mentioned they only took 53 shots in this win versus Utah. The difference was 55% make rate versus a 38.7% make rate that they had versus Kansas the first time. Now, also three-point shooting, they allow Kansas to shoot 47% from three-point range. That can't happen in this one, I think, if you want to win. You mentioned how many points UCF is giving up defensively versus how many they're scoring. The average is somewhat held. Like Kansas scored 91 points, right? But if you're UCF, you scored 87 points, shooting only 38% from the field. They were able to hit 14 three-pointers. If they get to 42% from the three-point line in this one, I think they win. As a matter of fact, 42% would have won them the last matchup because it would have been plus 6 points for them in this one. UCF has what it takes, Andrew. They have what it takes. I think hanging in there with Kansas for it to be so close, only shooting 38% from the field, kind of underscores it for me. Now, you only turned the ball over 7 times. They took care of the basketball in the first matchup. They've got to do that again. I think if you can keep the turnovers in single digits and not give Kansas a bunch of second chance opportunities, you've got a real good shot in this one. Now, obviously, they've got to shoot well. We know that. That's a given. But Johnny Dawkins' squad has a chance to send a message to his university leadership that, look, I'm the guy for the job, right? Give me some NIL money and give me a chance to go in and reinforce this roster, and we can make some noise in the Big 12 next year. But they're not done making noise in the Big 12 tournament right now. Tonight at 8:30, I'll be watching. I know Andrew's going to be watching. It's going to be a ton of fun. We're going to be here to talk about it. Final thoughts, man. I have to get a score prediction from you. I got to get you on the record. Who wins? Who wins tonight, Andrew? I'm not letting y'all.
Well, just so we don't confuse anyone, it's 8:30 Central because the game's the game is in Kansas City. So their list, the Big 12 always lists things as Central because they're a Central time zone dominant conference. That's something that UCF fans are still getting used to. Because being in the American Conference USA, right. All those Eastern. I see it. Those were Eastern Conference dominated times, conferences. So they always listed everything Eastern. I still have to think about it from time to time. The game's at 9:30, so they don't tune in too early. The game will be on ESPN2, so it will be on traditional TV this time around. Won't be on ESPN Plus. That was just the first round. But as far as this one, I hate to be a little bit of a negative Nancy. I think UCF's going to keep it close. I think they're going to fall a little bit short. I'd probably say 80 to 74 or something like that, where it's very respectful. But this is a team that's I don't think they're really built to play these back-to-backs, because the starters have so much work put on them, and Kansas, even though they've faded some, they're at least fresh. They're rested. And I think that's going to play against UCF on this. They have to win 5 games in 5 days to win the conference tournament. That's tough for anyone, But I do want to point out, with the win last night, UCF is assured no less than a 500 record for this year, no matter what happens.
Yeah, that's right.
Because they've got no more than 2 losses left this season, and they're 2 games above 500. So Johnny Dawkins at least will not have a losing record this season, which may help stave off, being eliminated himself. They're very much still in the run for the college basketball crowd, which I want to highlight again, is a new tournament that Fox is putting on. And because of the television contract, if you're selected for this, which the top 2 teams that don't make the NCAA tournament will be, you are required. You can't even turn. It's not like the NIT where you can turn it down. You cannot turn down the crowd. It's part of the media deal. So depending on where you look, UCF is starting to become more and more of a team that's going to maybe end up in the crown. Utah was one of the teams that was on the short list. UCF just jumped them. Kansas State's another one on the short list. Cincinnati's another one on the short list if they missed out on the NCAA tournament. So the top two get automatically in, and then you have at-larges. I expect UCF to be in the college basketball crown, which will be played in Las Vegas on the Fox channels. It's not a bad tournament. You're with Big East and Big Ten teams and maybe a couple others, other at-larges scattered in there. But they still have something to play for. And I think that's why they're going to keep it close.
Yeah. Look, respectfully, I hope you're wrong.
I hope I'm wrong too. I want to be wrong. Prove me wrong. I want to be wrong.
Yeah, I don't. I just think that the whole idea of rest when it comes to these conference tournaments is overrated. I think it's more important to be warm coming in. And UCF, like, look, man, they know basketball is a long grind of a season, and I think that these guys are going to be more motivated than Kansas to go. What do you have to lose? You don't have anything to lose if you're UCF, right? If you're Kansas, man, I don't know. Well, we'll see. We'll see how they handle this one. But as Andrew mentioned, 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central, not going to be on ESPN Plus. That is always a regrettable experience whenever any game is on ESPN Plus.
Yeah, we're not big ESPN Plus guys, but hey, at least it's available.
We'll be back here tomorrow morning to talk about the results of that one. Andrew, I want to thank you for joining me today. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
You can catch me on Twitter /X or Blue Sky at StatBoyDrew, and you can catch my writings on The Last Word on College Football, a part of the Last Word on Sports family.
That's it for another great edition of Locked On UCF. Thank you for making us your first listen of every day. For your next listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. Our guy Drake Told leads the conversation in conference realignment news. He pulls no punches when it comes to talking about every team in the Big 12, including the UCF Knights. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And you can find us here tomorrow, Locked On UCF.